If you appreciate the precision and craftsmanship of barrel-aged craft beer, you have to check out the Festival of Wood and Barrel-Aged Beer in Chicago. This annual festival and competition promises 350 one-of-a-kind pours from the best barrel-aged brewing programs in the country. Elevate your craft beer experience with bold, uniquely crafted beers across 13 style categories. The Festival of Wood and Barrel-Aged Beer in Chicago takes flight November 22nd and 23rd. Get your tickets at fobab.com, FOBAB.com.
Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Holl, and it's a lager and decoction show this week, and Brendan Arnold of New Jersey's Alternate Ending joins guest host Don Tess for a conversation. That's coming up in just a moment. But first, a reminder, please go visit allaboutbeer.com, where you can find original articles, reviews, news, insights, and podcasts. Listen to shows like Brewer to Brewer and the All About Beer podcast with co-host Don Tess and M. Sauter, simply by searching All About Beer wherever you listen to shows. You can also follow All About Beer on Instagram, Threads, and Facebook at All About Beer. And as always, keep up with all of the smoked beer news and releases by checking out This Week in Rauch Beer by searching the group on Facebook, or follow at TW Rauch Beer on Threads and Instagram. We also have glassware and some apparel available by going and visiting allaboutbeer.com/merch. This show and all of the work we do, it's supported by you. Please go visit patreon.com/allaboutbeer, where a few bucks goes a long way to keep the content fresh and to fund writers, photographers, creators, and editors. Independent media needs you now more than ever. If you'd like to learn more about advertising on this show or any of our shows, please email info@allaboutbeer.com. We'll get into the show in just a moment, but first, I'm very glad to welcome Ray Stout. He's the executive director for the Illinois Craft Brewers Guild, and he's here to talk about the Festival of Wood and Barrel-Aged Beer, also known as FOBAB, which is coming up on November 22nd and 23rd, and is a sponsor of this episode. So Ray, welcome, and please tell me about FOBAB and why it's a can't-miss fest. And then maybe tell us just how rare are some of these beers that are going to be poured over those 2 days in November.
Absolutely. So, Chicago is the reigning champion for the best craft beer city in the country. And so, we're bringing the best breweries in the country together for a competition and festival showcasing probably the hardest style of beer to master. And so, these beers that are made through the barrel aging process are quite often one-offs, right? So you're never going to be able to try a beer that's precisely like that ever again, no matter how many times it's blended or tried to be recreated, because the additions in the barrel aging process, and everything that comes along with that. And so, when we talk about access to rare beers, this festival really holds up some of the most rare beer in the world.
And tickets are selling fast, so you're encouraging folks to go and don't delay, right?
Absolutely. Don't delay on purchasing your tickets. There's only 2 sessions, one on Friday and one on Saturday, and we sell out every single year.
All right, Ray, thanks so much. You're going to be back with me at the bottom of the show to talk more about FOBAB. And in the meantime, I'm going to encourage folks to visit fobab.com to get their tickets and to learn more about the festival. It is, as we just said, a can't miss event for sure. A few weeks back, Don Tess, the great writer, malt enthusiast, and co-host of the All About Beer podcast, was in New Jersey and staying at my house. And we wound up going to Alternate Ending, a nearby brewery, where the head brewer, Brendan Arnold, plied Don with numerous lager samples, and the two engaged in a deep discussion of decoction. It was so entertaining that we decided to turn it into a podcast. So here it is, Don Tess in the guest host seat with Brendan Arnold of Alternate Ending.
Thank you for joining me, Brendan.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
So I had the privilege a week or two ago to visit Alternate Ending. Our mutual friend, John Holl, I was visiting him, and he was gracious enough to take me to your brewery. As is my typical MO, I asked you to pour me a couple samples of beers, and I was at your discretion, and you picked for me, I think it was 4, maybe it was 5 lagers that you make. At your brewery, you have IPAs and everything, but you chose lagers to pour for me. So why was that?
To me, I think the lagers on the menu really kind of represent kind of my technical background in brewing and just really represent, just I guess knowledge gained over the years. I'm a firm believer that it's tough to brew a great light lager. So I've spent a lot of years, really trying to hone my craft and also teach, other brewers, about those details. And I think if you can pull off a really nice, light, crisp, clean lager, I think it says a lot about just quality and even, professionalism. So I
Yeah.
stand by those beers. We do make some great hoppy beers, but I don't feel like they necessarily showcase, the technical aspects that I like to show off.
Yeah. You were flexing.
Well, I'm
You can admit it. You were flexing.
well, and if I would have had a Rauch beer, that would have been the first beer to come out. But unfortunately, it was still in a fermenter.
Yeah. Okay. I guess I'll have to come back. Um, One of the you were gracious enough to spend some time with us sitting at our table as I tasted the beers, and the beers were delicious, by the way, every single one of them.
Thank you.
And then you and we started talking about decoction mashing, which is what prompted this episode. John requested that we do this episode because he overheard you and me nerding out about mashing techniques and malt and all that. So,
Yeah.
as you say, you have IPAs on the menu. You have other beers on the menu that I'm sure sell just fine, if not better, and don't require as much effort as you put into your lagers. So, why do you do it?
That's an interesting question. I think, I've been brewing for a little while now and my palate's changed. But when we were planning the brewery, when we were planning alternate ending, we kind of we're right before we ordered the brew house, we kind of added the decoction loop, is what I call it, at the last minute. And we've got a 2 vessel, 10 barrel decoction system. And I think we were just thinking about getting into lagers and looking at kind of the consumer's changing palate. And,
Oh,
to me, as a brewer, I'm always trying to have as much control of the process as I can, the process, the fermentation, and create consistency. And this was a way, and maybe just personally for me to even just step up my game as a brewer, and really dive into more technical brewing. And I've been doing step infusion mashing for a while there, but it wasn't until I had this system that I could really get into, what's the next level of really, dialing in the mash and controlling all the flavors that you want in the beers. So, maybe it was a personal challenge, and maybe we were just lucky enough to be a little ahead of the curve when the lager and the lower ABV movement kind of started happening. Uh, Coincidentally, right in the middle of COVID, big time. People are drinking more, so we needed lower ABVs.
so what I personally find interesting is I visited a couple of breweries where like lager is their thing and they only do lagers, and you do IPAs, you do and lagers, and from what you just said, it was almost like a last minute addition to your brew house to have this capability. Um, are you seeing, for the longest time, IPA reigned supreme, whether it's, double IPA or session IPA or hazy IPA, and then kettle sour seem to be a thing now. Like, are you seeing that lager taking off for you? How do your lagers sell in comparison to your IPAs and things? And has it shifted I think it's 4 years that you've been open?
It definitely has shifted. We still have people, or I should say, consumers that are still very hazy IPA forward, beer drinkers. That's what they drink. That's what they love. I think I'm started to see some of the um, demand for the higher ABV hazy IPAs kind of dwindle. We don't really sell. We've tried a few triple IPAs here and there, but really anything above 8%, it's kind of becoming less and less popular. Definitely over 8.5 is much less popular.
Hmm.
But we're also seeing an aging beer drinker, I think. So that's increasing for us anyway, the popularity of the lagers. So, for us on our system, I can sell a 10 barrel batch of hazy IPA in about 4 weeks, but there have been times when we've released a 10 or 20 barrel light lager, and that's sold out even faster. So I
Okay.
think it's just kind of the changing or aging consumer, the beer drinker. We want to be able to drink a little bit more and not get as much of a buzz. Maybe it's palate fatigue also. I think, the hoppy beers, they had their run, but I mean, it feel like it's just a lot to pack on that much flavor and, that much body in a beer, all night long. You kind of have to have something lighter to, just clean your palate a little bit, right?
Yeah. Are you, certainly the argument is made that people can have 2 pints of a nice lager where they might only have 1 pint of a 8% IPA. So while you're seeing a shift of people drinking the lighter beers, are they drinking more of it or just replacing one for one?
Um, I think they're drinking a little bit more of it, and we're also fortunate enough to be a brew pub. So I feel like our customers are able to spend a little more time in our establishment, if they have the food component. Um, so, I don't think it's replacing one for one. I talk to different consumers. The benefit of kind of being a brew pub also is that I have, that direct contact with our customer that
Yeah.
some larger breweries or, strictly taproom only breweries, they don't have because, like I said, they spend more time there, they eat, we get to know their families. And, I think I'll see someone come in for two or three lagers and then they finish their night off with an IPA,
Oh,
you know,
really? That's interesting.
or we'll see someone just come in and drink four or five lagers. I think the beer drinker still loves beer. It's just it's a little difficult seeing that shift in the industry right now with just less and less people drinking. But I think the people that do drink beer are still drinking a few beers when they're out.
Yeah. Going back to this consumer palate shift to lagers, do you think it is just, aging demographic, or is it, and this is what I want to talk to you about, is it the fact that, brewers are actually caring more about how they make their lagers? They're not just decoction mashing, but thinking about the base malt that they're using for their decoction mashing lagers. Like maybe the shift to lager is because brewers such as yourself are actually making better lagers.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I definitely agree with that. We are seeing an aging beer drinker, but you're right. What I've noticed, there's a lot higher quality craft lager, and even 4 years ago, like I was thinking like craft lager or craft light lager, but yeah, I think brewers are more in tune with those fine details in the brewing process. So yeah, the beer is getting better. It's not like you go to a craft brewery for, an amber ale and a Hefeweizen, and then you stop and get your 24 pack of, Budweiser on the way home. They're spending the time and now their go-to or their, you know, everyday light lager is now from a small brewery.
Right.
So I think, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Small breweries light lager or craft lager is much better than it was, when I first started brewing. I mean, it was not many breweries even wanted to brew, light lager or, adjunct lager, or dive into those European styles because they were harder to brew. You
Yeah.
can't hide anything. The beer has to be perfect. And now with more technical small brewers, we're seeing that being, achieved more often.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate for what it's worth.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, same here. Absolutely. I'd much rather drink, a local beer than a macro beer. It's just got to be a really good local beer,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I'm a good beer drinker. If it happens to be local, then that's awesome. But I'm a good beer drinker first and foremost, personally. But
Yeah,
Um,
life's too short to drink bad beer.
that's right. I noticed that you put on your menu, w with the decocted beers, you put on the menu when it's single decocted or double decocted or triple decocted, the same as for your IPAs, you would put, what hops you put in it. Do you find customers care? Are they actually asking your servers, oh, like what does decoction mean? What does it mean that it's double decocted? Um, uh, and I guess is this the are we going to see more of this to come where customers will get more educated on lager, on what makes great lager, and will actually pick a beer because it's been decocted?
Yeah, and I think with the aging beer drinker, we also have the educated beer drinker, So for me, I want them to know really how much time, the brewer put into the process. This isn't a 2 week single infusion pilsner,
Yeah.
when we talk about our beer, it's really about the intensive process. It's not, it's the mashing, but it's also, fermentation time, maturation time, I always say time is the best ingredient. If we can convey the amount of time that I took or the brewer took to put into that product, I think that it has a higher perceived value. I mean, I've heard that, double decocted is the new double dry hopped. But
Okay.
I think it takes a lot longer to double decoct a nice lager than it does to,
Double dry hop.
double dry hop an IPA. Yeah.
Yeah. With all due respect to people who are dry hopping their IPAs.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, our house IPA is a double dry hop single IPA. And there'll always be a place for those beers. But yeah, I think it's just about the technical aspect of the process. And I want our customers to know that, you can go to another small brewery and get a lager and it's probably going to be just fine. But when you come to our brewery, I want you to know that we spent a lot of time and a lot of thought on this
Yeah.
beer. And
Yeah.
um, you're not necessarily going to taste that time, but you're going to feel it. You're going to know, like, this is a good, clean beer. And, somebody really cared when they produce this product.
Yeah. I mean, do you think decoction is just an evidence of caring, or does it actually make a difference? So is there an actual objective difference with decocting?
100%.
Yeah.
I for the longest time, when I first started brewing, it was, just trying to control a single infusion mash and get through a fermentation. And, as I kept pushing myself as a brewer, I started just spending more time on the mash doing even, step infusion. How do I control the fermentability of the wort? Or, how do I change this base malt to react with this mash schedule and this yeast strain to get the desired result? And, doing, even step infusion was a game changer just in terms of quality of the beer in my eyes, when it
Yeah.
comes to just, you know, the foam retention even and the clarity of the wort going into the kettle. But then, with alternate ending and kind of building out that brewery 4 years ago and opening, the decoction even took that to the next level where, not only can we still really control the fermentability of the wort, but we just get this richness in the beer and this mouthfeel and this nuanced character that you just can't replicate. And for me, it's more technical brewing, and I really feed off of that. You know, the more technical that is, the more rewarding, I guess it is for me.
Yeah.
When you can achieve, like, oh, we did a 14-hour triple decoction and taste how clean this beer is. You can't even tell I spent 14 hours on it. It's that clean. But so it's the technical side, but there's, to me, lager is it's all about process.
Yeah.
The recipes, and from day one when I first started brewing, my mentor when I was brewing in Kansas, he just said, recipes are a dime a dozen. It's your process that decides if you make a good beer or not. And this just amplifies that process, and to me, it amplifies the quality in these beers.
Yeah. How do you you were sort of hinting at it, like how do you think about when you're designing a beer, what makes you think single decoction, some single decoction or double decoction or triple decoction? And then what is magical? This is sort of a related but sort of unrelated question. What is magical about decoction where, you know, with a step infusion, you could hit any temperature you want. So what is it about decoction that is better than a step infusion, for example?
Well, I guess I'll start there. The step infusion, really allows you to control the fermentability of the beer. You
Yeah.
can really decide, what enzymes am I going to favor, what temperature, what mash thickness, and then okay, I have this consistent locked in fermentability. Okay, if I have a house pilsner, it pretty much finishes the same every time. If I pitch the same amount of yeast cells and it's healthy and we crop that yeast at pretty much the same time from a previous batch, so that's where you can get the consistency. But if you want to take that to the next level, using the decoction really increases the richness of the beer, the mouthfeel, the clarity of the wort even. It, I'm not, we're still on a steam jacket on our system, so I don't go for like a ton of Maillard. I don't think the customer should be able to taste the process. But to me, if you dial it in just right, it just has this authenticity and this just character that you can't create with a step infusion. And there are a lot of people out there that say, you can use melanoid and malt on a step infusion or use, some characterful base malts, but you're still just trying to recreate the flavor of a decoction process. So to
Right.
me, it's like, I'm not going to try to recreate that. I'm going to actually do that process and
Right.
then dial that process in from a technical perspective exactly the way, that I want it.
Yeah.
And so it's more gratifying and it's more natural, and just over the years, step infusion is great, but man, you just can't recreate our pilsner without a decoction. And going back to the first part of that question, how do I decide, either how many decoctions to use or when I'm formulating these? When I build a beer, and I'm a very stylistic brewer, so I think, okay, well, what is not necessarily the style guidelines, but what is this style? These beers have
Mhm.
been brewed for a very long time. So what is the style? And then I think, well, what is alternate endings version of this style? And then, kind of play with it from there. So, historical brewing and style is still important to me. Do I want to dry, I obviously want my German lagers to be drier and my Czech lagers to have more richness and more mouthfeel. So I kind of play with those decoction schedules and the length of those decoction boils or the volume of that boil to create, what alternate endings version of, a Czech pale lager or, a German Pilsner, should be.
Mhm.
So it's all tools in the toolbox that you can use to really have full control. I mean, as much as you can, it's still nature that we're trying to control. It does what it wants, but um, to me, I just love having as much control as I can to know that we have a consistent, high quality product going through the brewery.
Yeah. And I mean, what we're talking about here is you're not just picking, single decoction or double decoction, which I assume is driven by what rests you want your main mash to be. But even within those decoctions, then for the decocted portion, you're making choices about whether you're taking a thick slurry or a watery slurry, and then what temperature rests that decoction portion will step through as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what I've realized and I've learned a lot over the last 4 years of really, just honing my skills and learning is that the speed at which you run off. So we mash into our kettle. So it's a two vessel decoction system. So I can mash into the mash lauter tun with the false bottom, or I can mash into our mash kettle. So generally I'll mash into the kettle, and it has a great mixer in there. That being said, so we'll do step infusion into the kettle and achieve different temperature rests. But when I pull the main mash out of the kettle into the mash ladder tun, I'm leaving behind the decocted portion.
Yep.
Speed at which I pull that off and the speed at which I run the mixer can determine the thickness and thinness of the mash left behind. So, for me, you can play with that because you're going to get more Maillard reaction with, a thicker mash or a larger mash volume. So depending on what temperatures you're stepping through the main mash, you can determine, if I'm doing a larger temperature rest, I need a larger volume of mash that needs to be boiled. Is that a thick or a thin or moderately thin? How much color, how much character do I want to get out of that? So you can really hone this in on these different styles. So for me personally, the German styles, I step through, single or double decoction, but I'm always thinking dryness. And when I'm making these Czech lagers, I'm always thinking richness. So
Oh, I see.
how do I get a little thicker mash on, or a decoction boil on the Czech lagers, or how do I get a little larger volume of a decoction boil to just really recreate, that Czech lager feeling, and sometimes when you can get it right and you make a really nice double decocted Czech pale lager, it makes you feel like you're in Prague, and that's kind of what I'm going for with those beers. It's really wild. The more time you really spend and think about those little details, they can be really, really effective for the brewer.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people, and certainly online, I've had debates with people on whether decoction is worthwhile or not. And, they talk about, well, the only way to tell for sure is you have to do a scientific style test where the only variable that you change is whether you decoct or whether you infuse. And I don't think that's a valid argument. And I'm not a professional brewer, but I think that decoction is not a binary decision, yes or no. It's part of a greater question of, what is the malt that you're using? How modified is it? I noticed that in your brewery, you've got horizontal tanks and you use spunding valves, and all of that plays into, like, I don't know that you would necessarily want to use spunding valves if you had a single step infusion lager. Maybe you would, I don't know. But how do you think about, all of the other variables outside of decoction mashing as part of the decision to decoct or not decoct, I guess?
Well, I can say, as far as like spooning goes, I try to capture as much natural carbonation in every beer as possible. You do have to be a little careful with the German lagers. That can also determine, how much sulfur you have in your finished beer. You could lager some of that out, but what I've noticed is you can kind of control sulfur with how soon you start to spoon the beer. But I guess with the decoctions, I think each yeast strain kind of determines the cold side, the fermentation side. How is that going to go? But with the decoctions, I think it's a combination of the malt, the yeast strain that you're using, and then how are they going to work together with the decoction? If I'm making a Czech lager, we're big fans of Raven malt. So that malt with this decoction schedule, with this yeast strain, creates this product, So they're all lagered. Generally for us, I like 1 day of primary per degree Plato. And
Okay.
then we still do a slow step crash on the German lagers with 3470. For me, I'm a little quicker to crash maybe with our Czech lager strain, because I'm also, having spent a little time in Prague and Pilsen, I'm not anti-diacetyl anymore, as weird as that sounds. Like
Okay.
there are a lot of buttery beers there, but when you find the really good ones, it kind of changes your perspective on it a little bit. So I don't really have diacetyl in my beers. I guess I should say that first, but I don't encourage it and I don't discourage it. So we tend to
Okay.
crash the Czech lagers a little quicker. If we get it, we get it, but I never do. I think our yeast is always really healthy. Um, but that doesn't mean that those beers spend less time lagering. We're generally 7 to 8 weeks grain to glass on all of our lagers because, time in the tank, um, not necessarily for clarity, because we don't filter, and I really don't like to use biofine or any finings in the beer because we don't filter. But you just see you taste the beer bloom just right around that like 7.5 week mark where the yeast character has subsided. Maybe if you did like a German lager had a little sulfur that kind of just subsided, but right behind that, it's just kind of like the hops just pop and the carbonation is there, and the beer kind of tells you like it's ready. And I think that's regardless of yeast strain. But yeah, what I've noticed is, 6 weeks, okay, we're getting pretty close, but it's like 7.5 weeks for us. It's like, okay, this beer's it's ready to go. And then if the clarity's there, great. If not, we're a non-filtering brewery, so if it's somewhat clear, we're good to go.
Yeah.
It's all about the flavor and that the richness and the drinkability of the beer at that point.
Yeah. You mentioned Raven malt. What is it specifically? There's 100 malt suppliers out there, each supplying, dozens of different malts. What is it about Raven malt that you think is special? And do you think it's special because it allows you to decoct, or do you think it's special that requires you to decoct? Like, how do you think of your malt in your malt choices, and then how does that drive your beer development?
Raven, when we were in Prague, I tasted a few breweries, beer, and there was one small brewery in particular that, they were using that Raven malt. And I just felt like, if you're going to make a Czech lager, you've got to use malt grown in the Czech Republic, because you just can't recreate that flavor.
Yeah.
Um, and we had a local supplier with that. I had a few brewer friends that were also using it, but to me, I want that beer to taste like it should. And then, if you find that maltster or that supplier, then you can look at the COA and determine, well, I absolutely shouldn't decoct this, or I still can, and then, a lot of that, depending on the modification is, do you do a protein rest or not? I still do a quick protein rest, even with well-modified malts. It probably sounds crazy to some, single infusion brewers, but what I found is, once you figure out how to make beer, then you got to figure out how to make foam. And that's the hardest thing. How do I have long lasting foam? And what I've found, if the degree of modifications a little bit low, then, we can lower it and we can, do a little bit lower temperature protein rest, and we're talking, for me, it's maybe 126 to 133 Fahrenheit. Um, what's that, like 52 to 55 C. Um, if it's a little less modified, I'll lower that temperature. That'll give me a larger decoction volume to move into a saccharification rest. But even with modified malts like Fireman Pills, I'll grain in at the high end of protease. So I'm activating that enzyme, and it's also cleaning up, some other aspects of the kernel. It's opening up that cell wall for us. But as soon as we're grained in, I'll infuse right away to the next temperature because it's still during that graining in process and the mashing process, that enzyme was activated. But from what I've found, we do get better foam retention and better efficiency if I just spend even just a few minutes at the high end of protease, let's say 130 to 133 Fahrenheit. We get better long lasting foam and a higher efficiency there. And that is something I've experimented with, like on our German Pilsner, that is just with or without the protein rest. And, we'll get, 5 to 10% better efficiency.
Oh,
with a stop through there, just breaking down that cell wall enough before we start really degrading all of our foam positive proteins. But you can find a sweet spot in there. And so I'm still, a proponent of a protein rest. And then, the way you step through your enzyme can determine the fermentability of the beer. Those temperatures would also, tell you how large or small your decocted volume is going to be, which then would determine how long are you boiling that decoction. Do I want to get a lot of flavor and character out of this, or do I just need the temperature? But anytime you're moving the grain around or you're spending those a little bit extra time at those lower temperatures, you're just going to really manipulate that cell wall and the kernel better. And to me, I think it makes a better product. I don't know if I answered your question. I think I did.
Yeah, if nothing else, I love listening to people who are passionate about what they do. So I appreciate all that. But speaking of that, I'm a self-professed beer nerd and I love talking about, free amino nitrogen levels in malt. And I love talking about European barley varieties and how they compare against North American barley varieties. But I know I'm the minority in even within beer geekdom. So like when a new customer walks into your brewery, who, presumably they're walking into your brewery because they like beer, but they probably, I'm guessing most of your breweries don't know what a decoction mash is or an infusion mash is, and they probably don't know about malt modification or horizontal tanks and diastat or hydrostatic pressure or spooning valves. So like a customer walks in, what is your hope that they will take away from your brewery versus any other brewery that they could walk into? What do you hope they appreciate is special about you?
I just hope they appreciate that even though we're a small brewery, small mid-sized brewery, whatever you call it, that we have the attention to detail and the professionalism of a larger brewery. I want them to come in and say, well, not only do you have a really clean product, really clean beer here, but you guys really care, you spend the time, really formulating these recipes. You spend the time on the hot side, you spend the time on the cold side, and it's all about just making the best beer you possibly can. We're not, those bros just in the back making beer, hanging out. Like we're really spending the time to create the highest quality product we can. And that's what I want the customers. I want them to appreciate that we love what we do and we're trying to make the best product we possibly can.
Yeah, love that. Um, for people who are skeptical of decoction mashing and skeptical of all of the effort and love that you put into your beer, what do you wish they would understand, whether they be pro brewer, other pro brewers or home brewers or just beer lovers? What do you hope that they would appreciate about decoction mashing, other than the effort that you put into it?
Well, it is going to be a challenge for any brewer to start thinking about, really turning their beers into more of a complex hot side, process. But I think I would want them to understand that the more time you spend educating yourself about every little detail in that process, especially on the hot side, cold side, but with decoction, like on the hot side process, the more attention to detail you give your beer, the more consistency you're going to have. And to me, that's what really defines a professional brewer, is that, you can create a consistent product.
Yeah.
So, and also that, the text is out there, your other brewer friends that are trying these things, like our industry is so great that we share our wealth of knowledge. So if you reach out, the information is there, it's not going to be as difficult as you think to get those calculations and to just spend some time thinking about it. You will make a higher quality product. And once you get it dialed in, it's going to be so consistent that, it just becomes the way. And I think every brewer should strive for, consistency. Not only just making the highest quality beer you can, but the repeatability. You've got to take a lot of notes, spend a lot of time. If you change something, change one variable, don't change a lot of things. Just really perfect your craft. There's still a lot of brewers that do this, on the side or part-time, but I'm one of those guys, and this is what I do. And I think if you're going to do this as a career, you should do it the best you possibly can. And I think just keep stepping up that ladder and, how do I improve this, aspect? How do I optimize this small process of the mash or this small process or this small process? And over the life of your career, as you optimize everything, you gain that control, and you also get to sleep at night knowing like everything's going to work out great. I don't have to stress like I used to when I was first learning how to brew beer, and just take the time, really dive in. The information's there, and you'll be surprised at how it will increase the quality of, a single infusion lager.
Yeah.
And I tell a lot of brewers too, I say, at a least, if you want to step up your beer, you got to start doing step infusion. And then you can really have the control of the fermentability of the beer. Because, a lot of brewers aren't looking at their malt COAs, and that single infusion temperature doesn't work year after year after year. You have to change that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you do a step infusion and really look at those enzymes, there's going to be less variability, and you'll get a consistent fermentation.
Right. Love it. Well, for what it's worth, my personal opinion is that the difference between good beer and great beer is not one thing. It's the accumulation of 100 tiny things. Does decoction mashing make a difference? A small amount. The malt protein level make a difference? A small amount, et cetera, et cetera. And you as you say, as you kind of keep pecking away at small changes, making small differences, all of a sudden you get a world-class beer, which is what I personally tasted at your brewery. I was very, very pleased with the beers. And as you say, the foam, I take notes on every single beer I try, and I was just inputting them in the computer a couple days ago from Alternate Ending, and for every single one of your beers, one of the notes I had is the lacing, parallel rings of foam clinging down the side of the glass, which I just think is a beautiful thing. So I personally thank you for all the effort and passion that you put into your beer.
No, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I think that's always been a goal of mine is how do you have dense foam on your last drink of that beer?
Right.
What's your last sip of that beer? It still has foam retention on it. So that's something I'm still chasing, but and that to me, that's just a quality parameter. Really great beer has really great foam, and that's always what I've been after as well.
Yeah. I am, as you know, I am guest hosting this show. It's John Holl's show, and he is famous at the end of every episode asking the green door question. Are you familiar with the green door question?
I am familiar with the green door question.
All right. Well, I'm on John's behalf. I'm going to ask you the green door question. If you could walk through a green door right now and be any place in the world with anybody in the world having a pint, who would it be and where would you be?
I have so many great memories of just sitting in the garage, drinking Sierra Nevada pale ales with my dad. And it's been many, many years since we've done that. So I think just, maybe being back in Kansas in the garage, just on a sunny, late afternoon, midweek, drinking 12 Sierra Nevadas, that would be a pretty cool place to be right now.
Yeah, I love it. And I love the fact that even though we've just spent the last 40 minutes talking about how amazing triple decocted lager is, that the beer you want to have with your dad is a infusion mashed pale ale. Because there's a place for every kind of beer.
And that beer is it's so iconic, and it's just one of those beers. It's a time and place, right?
Yeah.
And that beer at that time at that place, that's definitely a green door. I drink a lot of light lager beer, Yeah, that's
I love it. No, I love it. I just it just proves that this is to me this is the beauty of beer. There's a beer for every occasion, for every person that you're with, and it's not that decoction is better. It's that decoction makes a certain type of beer better. And when you're looking, for example, for a pale ale, you know, don't decoct it. Don't use the Raven malt. Do whatever Sierra Nevada is doing, and that beer is perfect in its own right.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's exactly the beer that they wanted to make, and with the decoction brewing, that's exactly the lagers that I want to make.
Right. Right.
So it's what do you want to do with your beer? How do you want to represent your brand, or how do you want to represent yourself as a brewer? All of these things are tools at your disposal to make, the best beer you possibly can.
Yeah. Love it. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you for nerding out with me both in person when I
Anytime,
was
man.
there and on this show. Hopefully, the listeners will appreciate, not only what you're doing, but maybe what some other lager brewers are doing when they're decocting and sourcing special grains for their decoction mashes and everything. So,
I hope so.
yeah, let everybody drink good beer. Thank you very much. Thanks, Brendan.
Yeah. Thanks, Don.
Cheers.
Cheers.
John Holl back with you. My thanks to Don and Brennan. If you have questions, comments, guest suggestions, it's easy. You can email me. It's johnholl@allaboutbeer.com. That's JOHNHOLL. A reminder, go visit allaboutbeer.com where you can check out the podcast page, our merch page, and read great new content, as well as our archives going back to 1979. If you're looking for something beer related, chances are we have something on it. Follow All About Beer on social media at All About Beer. And if you're interested in supporting journalism in the beer space, email us at info@allaboutbeer.com or go to patreon.com/allaboutbeer. As promised, Ray Stout, the executive director for the Illinois Craft Brewers Guild, is back with me to talk about the Festival of Wood and Barrel Aged Beer, also known as FOBAB, which is coming up on November 22nd and 23rd. The festival is sponsoring this episode, and Ray, I've been looking through the list of breweries attending this year. It's dang impressive. Who are you most excited to welcome and have attendees try?
If you scroll through the list of about 180 breweries, it is a little intimidating. But, some local hometown heroes like Goose Island and Revolution Brewing always bring some of the best barrel-aged beers that you will try in the country. But, I'm excited to welcome folks from out west, like Lost Abbey comes every year, and they continue to bring barrel-aged beer that is unparalleled. And, you can't forget about Firestone Walker, and the list just goes on and on. My favorite thing to try at this festival is the smaller breweries that you haven't heard of before, because some of the best barrel aged beers I've had in my life have been from breweries where I've tried the beer and I was like, I've never heard of that place before. That's what makes this festival so cool.
Having attended in the past, I am always really excited to see what the brewers bring. And it's not just normal run of the mill stuff. They really dig deep and come up with some fun things to showcase at this festival, because I think the brewers really like being there as well.
That's what makes it so unique. It's really a festival for brewers and by the brewers. And I think the people that are most excited to be there are the brewers. The attendees obviously are very happy too, but you'll see these breweries jumping up and down with just even the inkling of the possibility of winning an award at FOBAB.
Well, thanks, Ray. I'm going to encourage folks to go and visit fobab.com. They can get their tickets there. They can learn more about the festival. And seriously, it is a can't miss event. Make sure you get your travel plans set for Chicago. Ray, as always, I appreciate the insight and you all being a sponsor of this podcast, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
See you there.
Give a listen to some of the other All About Beer podcasts, including the All About Beer podcast and Brewer to Brewer, simply by searching All About Beer wherever you listen to shows. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday. The BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. And go check out probrewer.com each week for original articles from the All About Beer team. As for this show, Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Holl with my thanks again to Don Tess. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'll be back again to drink beer and to think beer.